Education School Committee. All members are in attendance with the exception of Jesse Fenner. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we get to our next agenda item, I want to say that I think many people may know that we were planning to award a diploma tonight to a World War II veteran, Elmer Drew, which was going to be accepted by his nephew, Warren Drew. Unfortunately, Warren Drew was not able to join us tonight, so we are postponing that, and we'll bring that back to another school committee meeting when he is able to attend. And so we will be passing over that on the consent agenda and bringing that back to a later meeting. All right, so next we have student representatives from the middle school, Georgia Hansen and Chloe Strahalowak. Please come forward and join us. Thank you.
It is hard to believe that we only have 60 days of school left and that MCAS will be starting in 2 weeks. The year has surely flown by. Today, March 13th, guidance counselors will visit 8th graders at the middle school. They will review the program of studies with students and help them navigate course selections for their freshman year. It is hard to believe our MS years are almost over.
The Paw Print Literary Magazine is working towards publishing its 26th issue. We've collected articles, poetry, paintings, sketches, and digital drawings created by middle schoolers depicting the interactions between nature and technology. The collection will be available on our website March 21st at wmspawprint.weebly.com.
World Culture Club has been learning about Poland and all the wonderful Polish traditions. Students learned all about the food of the culture, such as pierogies and gołąbki. Students also learned about the language and history. Polish is a challenging language to learn because they do not have a phonetic alphabet. Poland is also not on the euro for their economic currency, which is unusual in European countries. Students also learned about some of the darker history that occurred in Poland, especially during World War II. Students in 8th grade have begun their unit on the Holocaust, and learning about Poland was helpful for their academics as well.
Tomorrow, students in the advisory block will complete another panorama lesson called Crest of String. Students were to put their name on crest and pass it around their advisory group. As they do so, students will write down positive things about that student. Students will then receive their crest back, decorate them, and display them in their rooms. Students will also be completing the year and survey regarding advisory lessons and activities. Stay tuned. We will begin the planning process for the spring door decorating next week.
The WMS GSA has begun a book club for Alan Cole is Not a Coward by Eric Bell, thanks to funding from WMS. Students are enjoying reading and discussing this novel about a 7th grader figuring out his queer identity and the struggles and joy that come with it. We've also discussed local, national, and global current events while socializing and relaxing with art projects. We're getting ready to celebrate the National Day of Silence in April.
Thursday, March 14th, the PAC and Student Council will hold the 7th grade dance. This is a highly anticipated event for our 7th graders. Students will be able to have pizza, drinks, and snacks. The 7th grade Student Council will be providing the dancing entertainment by bringing their DJing skills. They've been working hard on this playlist since May.
On Friday, March 22nd, 2024, Student Council members will be attending the Massachusetts Partnerships for Youth Conference, Learning to Lead for the Middle School Student at Essex, Aggie, and Danvers. Students will attend workshops on an active learning approach that is student-driven. Our focus on the power of decision-making and the ripple effect it has on your daily living and those within their sphere of influence will be reinforced. Participants will explore the roles, responsibilities, and different forms of leadership, including rational leadership, formal versus informal leadership, as well as how to build meaningful and intentional relationships with others. This conference is designed to enhance leadership potential, increase self-worth, promote healthy life choices, and build intellectually stronger young people through a value-based focus.
The PE department is holding our annual March Madness grade level tournament during the next couple of weeks. The climax of this event will be the semifinals and finals on March 22nd and 28th. Teachers and faculty will be there to cheer on students and bring their school spirit down to the gymnasium. They will be selecting a few students to play knockout versus some of their favorite teachers, so this should be a great time had by all.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments from the committee?
Thank you for coming
Thank
this
you.
evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, great job. All right, that brings us to our consent agenda. And the only thing that I want to go into before we vote on the consent agenda is the WEF grant. So we have some miscellaneous grant awards and curriculum grant awards, and I always like to call those out and show what they actually are, because WEF does such great work supporting our schools, and also that our teachers do great work in finding the things that we can use and need. It takes work to do that. So I want to just read out that the curriculum grants that WEF is awarding, $520 to Sophia Gugliotta, Strides teacher at Shawsheen Elementary, for incorporating sensory play with students with autism. $2,376 to Michelle Levesque, K-5 STEM coordinator, for bridging the gap with Bridges intervention. And $250 to Ashley Rockebauer, Strides and Life Skills teacher at the high school, for unique learning system for Strides and life skills. Those are the curriculum grants. And the miscellaneous grants are $2,500 to Michelle Levesque, K-5 STEM coordinator, for the 2024 STEM Fair. $286.83 to Jill Reynolds, classroom teacher at the North, for solar eclipse glasses. $151.29 to Robin Barry, music teacher at the Boutwell, for general music storybooks in the library. And $995.96 to Michelle Kirchen, library teacher at the West Intermediate, for quick fic, high interest for young readers. So thank you very much to WEF for your generosity, and also thank you for the teachers who applied for these grants as well. All right, and with that, we have a big consent agenda. So we will be voting on approval of minutes for the February 14th, 2024 regular session, acceptance of these two grants that I just read out, the WEF Miscellaneous Grant Award and the Curriculum Grant Awards, approval of the Wilmington Middle School School Council Improvement Plan, policies, revised policies GCK, GCL, GCO, GCE, GCF, GCG, GCI, and GCS, approving the removal of furniture at Wilmington Middle School. Warrants, grants 21, revolving 37 through 42, local 72 through 78, food service 43 through 47, circuit breaker 18, 19, and 20, special education 37 through 44, and payroll for the week of February 28th, 2024, and March 13th, 2024. Do I have a motion? Motion from Dr. McCaldy and seconded by Mr. Turner.
Discussion?
Certainly.
I'd like to break out the minutes, since I wasn't a part of the last meeting, in order to be able to vote on the rest of the consent agenda, as well as I had a point of correction in one of the policies.
Okay, if there's no objection, we'll withdraw the minutes from the consent vote and vote separately on that and discuss that separately.
Okay. Can I, would this be a good time to, with regards to one of the policies that needs correction?
Oh, is there, and there's also a policy?
Yes.
Which one?
GCS, it's the posting of bargaining agreement and superintendent contract. It's a minor correction.
All right, so again, if there's no objection, we'll withdraw policy GCS and the approval of the minutes from the consent agenda vote.
Thank you.
And take those up separately.
Appreciate it.
All right, so I'll just start this over again. So do I have a motion for approval of the consent agenda? Motion by Dr. McCaldy, seconded by Mr. Samaha. All in favor? And that is unanimous. All right, so let's next take up the minutes from the February 14th meeting. Ms. Burns, what was your?
I was gonna recuse myself from that vote since I was absent.
Okay, so all right, I understand. All right, so all in favor of approving the February 14th regular meeting minutes? All opposed and abstaining?
One.
And all right, so that is passed 5-1 with Ms. Burns abstaining. All right, and then next we have policy GCS.
So I would like to bring forth just a minor correction for the second reading. It has reviewed at the bottom of this particular policy, GCS, which is the posting of bargaining agreements and superintendent contracts. We should remove August 28th, 2019 and just keep the January 2024 since it would be the last date of review.
That would usually occur once it's finalized after a second reading.
Well, but if it's I respectfully, if it's going to be accepted and voted on, it should be made with the updates as we have done with the usual content and text within. So it's just a minor,
So you're just saying that we should remove the
we should
text
redact it.
of the August 28th, 19
Correct.
reviewed so that it only reads adopted September 25th,
January.
2019, or rather,
Correct. So that it reflects simply the adopted, you're right, excuse me, my apologies, September 25th with a review of January, I'm not sure if it was the 13th of 2024 at our last policy meeting, but that's the only, I just wanted to make sure that the August 28th, 19 was redacted.
all right, any further discussion? Any objection to making that edit? Yes?
I'd like to put forth a motion with that redaction.
Okay, we have a motion to approve with that correction, and seconded by Mr. Samaha. Further discussion, all in favor? And that is unanimous. All right, thank you very much. That brings us to the superintendent's report. Dr. Brandt.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. There are 3 items tonight under the report, and I will go in order, of which there's also documents that accompany these 3 items as well in the packet for members of the community, who may be interested. So first is the update on superintendent goals. We'll start there. There was a memo that I included in the packet, and it's, in case folks are wondering, it's around this time of the year in which it's customary to provide the committee with an update on the work associated with the superintendent goals that are, as you know, approved by the school committee, usually in the earlier part of the school year, usually in the fall. We did so this year, you recall, and we've also added to the packet an update that is a document that should look familiar. It reflects the goals that I presented to you back in October, I think it was, that ultimately, as I mentioned, you approved. As you'll recall, there were a number of goals there, 4 specifically, and I've tried to shape these around the DESE model for evaluation and the recommendations to provide to you for goals. The reality is, as I mentioned in the cover memo, that this year has been a unique year, different in the time demands on a couple of different fronts, and specifically related to, at the beginning of the year, I know you all recall well the school transportation challenges that we had, and then what really began at the beginning of the year and has continued, and that is a major item on tonight's agenda, as you know, and that's around the MSBA project. So with an effort to try and be fully transparent to the committee and the community, these goals are, of course, an important part of our work together. They are priorities that are, of course, in addition to the regular work that I try and provide and deliver in my role. But the reality is that because of these challenges, it's been a challenge, respectively, to try and make progress, reasonable progress on the goals set. So knowing that it's at this point that I should be providing you with an update on these, I tried to do that. I tried to be realistic in terms of bringing forth some modifications to the timelines, really, for the most part, for these. And as we continue through the coming months, I've tried to reflect what I think is reasonable, which is feasible in some of these adjustments, and I pointed those out with some edits, in the overall goals. So, you know, in hindsight, of course, is what it is. And thinking back, I did not, as you know, include any goals specific to the MSBA project. I didn't think transportation would be the challenges, respectively, that we dealt with, of course. But in hindsight, that was probably a mistake, and I acknowledge that in the memo. Again, it's with the effort to try and be transparent and honest in terms of where I'm at in terms of these goals, and happy to take questions or comments from members of the committee on any of this.
All right, comments, Ms. Burns?
I'll just make a comment. I think it's taken in light with regards to the extensive meetings and project that surrounds the MSBA project. I think this is a great indicator of reasonable and understandably viable timelines, which I appreciate you updating and not only for transparency's sake, but with so much going on, it's helpful to see this and know exactly where the new, proposed timelines are and what we can expect to see at certain points. And it's understandable knowing. I think anybody watching these meetings and the discussion around the Wildwood project, there's just not enough time in the day to muster, especially those timelines that MSBA are looking for additional materials and content with regards to what we're proposing and what we want to do. So I thank you very much, because I think in of it itself, it still is a very tight timeline for you to focus on your goals and to accomplish certain metrics within them. But so I very much appreciate your work and your attention to these goals and what you can viably do. I think it's very helpful and really important to have that understanding, so we know exactly
Sure.
what to expect.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Samaha?
I just want to say that, the goals are part of the evaluation, and I think having a superintendent who's flexible and adaptable as part of their performance is really, really important. So I think if there was this laser focus on your goals at the expense of the MSBA or the transportation issues, that would constitute a problem. So I agree with Ms. Burns about it makes a lot of sense that you've updated the goals, and looking at the timelines, it all still makes a lot of sense. So I just, I appreciate the flexibility that you've had in adapting to all the challenges that have come up.
Thank you.
Dr. Bryson?
So I won't repeat, same as my colleagues. The only thing I will say is, I think that moving forward, we knew MSBA was going to be such a major project, and I think we discussed actually in here having that be one of the goals, and you felt like it was part of your regular job. And I think this has happened a couple where we're like, oh, this is a really big thing, like
Right.
school start time. And so I would just encourage us as a committee to support you in that, like, making goals that I know you're going to be spending a lot of time on that. I think we said MSBA is going to take a lot of time, and that would have been a really good goal because you could have then shown
Yeah.
up, right? And so I hear you when you say, that's what I'm doing anyway, I'm going to do these above and beyond, but MSBA is already above and beyond your day-to-day work. So I think we just need to be more realistic about the big projects you're doing, because then this doesn't feel good because you're doing so many things above and beyond your day-to-day. And now we're looking at this and going, oh, it's a bummer you didn't get to that. Like, it wasn't even realistic for you to get to some of this in the beginning of the year. So I'll just,
Yeah.
as we move forward, I think, and this has happened a couple of times, I just want to make sure you know that it doesn't have to be stuff above and beyond what you're already doing.
Well, thank you for that. And, I just say, again, hindsight, of course, it's always so crystal clear. And had there been the clarity around exactly what was to come in this project, of which they feel like my colleagues now, who you'll hear from shortly, could have, they should have helped in setting the goal, quite frankly. It would have been, so I do hear what you're saying, and I do,
Well, now you
know
know how to go into it next year.
but I struggle with trying to identify a goal which is part and parcel with the job that, might come with the being in the seat. But anyway, I thank you for that.
Mr. Turner?
So without I agree with everything that's already been said, but the one piece I'd like to add is, we did all agree that these were good and important goals, and so to the extent they're sliding and moving, I really do want to make sure that they're at the top of the list for the things we consider for next year. So, particularly the goal that's slipping into September, but also the one that went from all of the schools to 4 of the schools, getting to those other 4 schools next year, provided the MSBA project is one that fits in as well.
Right, right.
You know, so the goals you have are great ones, and making sure we do wrap to the end of these goals and the targets associated, I think is very important, and I don't want to lose sight of them when we get back to the goals at the beginning of next year.
Thank you for that, and I would just take the opportunity to reiterate that the fact that there's adjustments here does not take away from what I think is still an important area of focus. So that's, it wasn't just sort of putting something on paper. I think that these things remain important and will be helpful in different ways. So some adjustments in timelines, but not to suggest that they're no longer important, because I think they all are still. So, thank you.
I want us to think a little bit ahead to the evaluation cycle, because we're going to be finishing, we're in the second year of the 2-year evaluation, so we're doing a summative evaluation that will be wrapping up at the end of this school year, and we need to think a little bit about how these adjusted timelines are going to come into that, because we've already, but just looking at some of the proposed adjustments, we're pushing it beyond June. Like, we usually, deliver the superintendent's evaluation at, I think maybe like the first June meeting, or something like that. In any case, some of these are being pushed into the summer and over into the fall. So I think we do need to think a little bit about how we're going to potentially rate Dr. Brand on some of these goals, as far as kind of, substantial progress being made. I mean, if some of them, the very nature of them is the reason we're having this conversation is because some of them are behind. I wonder if it might not make some sense to potentially drop, say, one of these goals for this year or for the 2-year cycle. It can always come back in next year, but just as a thought, if it's getting pushed far enough out anyway, then there's a certain point at which maybe it makes sense to kind of take stock of the situation at the beginning of next year and not try to still pursue all 4 of these goals by but kind of kicking the can down the road. Ms. Burns.
So to comment to that, it would seem actually very reasonable if I could say that maybe we press pause as opposed to deferring. I mean, same thing, different vernacular. But I think I would, if we are going to do that, then I think I would love to instead perhaps encapsulate some of this MSBA project, I don't know if that's a possibility, into Dr. Brand's current goals, because I think, as Dr. Bryson said, I think it is a very viable and a very indicative metric to his leadership and the education of the children within this district. I mean, building a new educational institution is always a huge undertaking, not only for the design and the subcommittee, the building committee aspects, but take into consideration that he not only is driving it, he is also the chair, which is really not something that you would typically see because of the other roles a superintendent plays within a school district. So I don't know if that's a possibility to revision at this half year cycle in his evaluation. But if there is a possibility, because I do think, however it needs to be worded, I think encapsulating some of that, just so that, especially since we have to submit it to DESE, I think it would behoove him for the time and the efforts and the work currently going into this huge undertaking. So I don't know if that's a possibility.
I think that can absolutely be on the table. The school committee is able to revise and approve a new set of superintendent goals. Procedurally, incidentally, the discussion is tonight in terms of what we think we should do, and then normally we would bring this back for the second read and approval at the next meeting. So we're not going to be voting on any revisions tonight. Dr. McCauley.
Yeah, so I had a really similar idea to you. I think it's a good idea because
Great minds
just
think
kind of
alike.
reflects, things change. We had great intentions when we first came up with this, but things are now different. So I'm wondering if we can maybe revise these to add in some of the work on the school start times and the MSBA onto that potentially, while also then deferring some of these other goals to the next year. Right.
Mr. Turner?
So, sometimes the way I think about the goals is actually, instead of this case where it's 4, I think of 5. I think of these goals and how you perform against them, and then there's a more of a higher level review of performance in terms of how the job is completed. And so when I would look at this now, I would say the reset goal, effectively, how did you perform against 80% of the goal? Because that was the reset timeline, and evaluate it against that sort of a standard down through the 4 goals. And then at the summary level, there's another piece that says, and oh, by the way, there was this extra topic that was not addressed directly in the goals that ended up becoming a substantial portion of the year, and the performance was this against that additional effort that was not previously accounted for. And so I feel like there's a flexible way to do it without changing the goals, or if the colleagues agree to restructure the goals themselves, that would get to the same point. Whether or not we want to take the time to rewrite the goals and add in an MSBA goal or evaluate the performance in the same way, I would be okay with either approach.
I think I would be in favor of adding the MSB project as a goal, because again, thinking ahead to how we're going to conduct this evaluation, it just occurs to me that if we're not addressing that front and center, then how can we say that we're evaluating Dr. Brown's performance this year when the most substantial, the most significant, and most important part of what he did this year, and what took more of his time than anything else, is not a substantial and significant, major part of what we're actually doing the evaluation on? Like, in thinking about it in those terms, to me, it kind of says like that would make no sense to not have that be a formal part of the evaluation. Ms. Barnes?
So just to add to that and expand upon that, our mission here, why we hire Dr. Brand, is to elevate and evolve the education for our students, and superintendent goals reflect that. And hence the reason why, if Dr. Brand is amendable to doing such thing, because he's the one who has to create the goals for himself, it's not us, but I do think that this MSBA project overall will tie in, and does tie in just to some extent to our strategic initiatives, and then the overall success of the goals that he currently has placed, that however he decides to set it up, defer. It ties into learning communities and institutions that are only going to drive the goals within these goals here at whatever stage. And maybe it's I'm saying in too general of a term, but in the overarching thought of it, the MSBA is really driving the future of our education system within Wilmington, thus the initiatives within these goals. So that's another way of looking at it, perhaps, for me.
Dr. Bryson?
Can I just make a quick suggestion, and then I think we should probably move on, and you can talk in your next agenda meeting about this. But it looks like 3 and 4 I would keep. I would add an MSBA one, and then I would move the first 2, since those dates have shifted considerably, really to the summer anyhow, to next year's goals. That seems to be the most logical thing. So that's my last 2 cents. I don't think we should continue talking about this right now.
Thank you.
Further questions or comments? All right, and then before we move on, let me just quickly see, is there a sense of the committee towards Dr. Bryson's suggestion?
I'm sorry, can you clarify?
Oh, I'm trying to get just the sense of the committee in terms of accepting Dr. Bryson's suggestion for revised goals of Dr. McCauley.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement with that. The only thing I would maybe add, if it's too cumbersome to change it, there's been some action on 1 and 2. Us as the committee, if we feel comfortable, can evaluate Dr. Brand on the action that has been performed to date upon the evaluation for 1 and 2. But other than that, I agree with Dr. Bryson.
All right, Mr. Turner?
I would yes, you've made progress on the goal, we should evaluate the progress made so far, because that was a good and important effort to date. But yes, what Dr. McCullough said as well.
All right, Mrs. Burns?
I think I would defer to Dr. Brand on what his preference would be. These are his goals brought before us, so I don't think we have that deciding factor or purview to decide what we want to do as opposed to how Dr. Brand would like us to view the goals. Should he choose to revise them or keep them, or in part up for us to touch upon them? That decision really lies in Dr. Brand, and what we can only do is recommend our thoughts and recommendations for him to consider, and then perhaps bring forth to the board for, to give us guidelines and direction for the evaluation process.
Yep. The committee ultimately has the authority on approving the goals, but I absolutely agree that we want Dr. Brand's, opinion and guidance on what he can accomplish. We don't come up with these goals in the first place. All right, let's move to next item.
Sure, two more real super quick. Speaking of MSBA, a copy of the flyer that is in the packet, and we are making every effort to try and distribute information on this as widely as we can. There's a copy of the flyer for the next community forum, forum number 3 for the MSBA Wildwood Project. It has been scheduled for March the 28th at 7 o'clock. It will be held here in the large group instruction room. We're also continuing our efforts to try and make this, though, an event that is hybrid, so to speak, and accessible for those that can't make it in person. And so we will continue to do that. The Zoom link is there. We will, again, try and push this out as widely as we can through school newsletters, district newsletters, and so on. And then thirdly, a copy of another event that's coming up very quickly. On April the 6th, Wilmington Parent Guardian University, the second annual, I will note, is scheduled for April 6th here at the high school, 9 o'clock in the morning until 12. You'll recall this was an effort that was made possible through the contributions of many last year. We had a good initial turnout for our first one. We're, of course, hopeful and optimistic that it's even larger this year. And this is all about partnerships, and as I said in my newsletter, the piece that's about to go out this week for the district newsletter, you recall our 5th strategic objective is we are one community. And to me, of the many efforts, I think this is really ranks right up there in terms of our effort as a school system to provide opportunities to engage and connect with our caregivers and parent guardians. A lot of great sessions that are scheduled. Ms. Elliott has worked hard to coordinate this along with many of our other district and school leaders. So please mark your calendars. Lynn Lyons is the keynote speaker, as you'll note on the flyer, who will be giving a focused talk on anxiety, of course, specifically for students. So with that, that concludes the superintendent's report, unless there are any other questions. Thank you.
Any further questions for Dr. Brand? All right, that brings us to public comment. We received no written public comments nor residents signed up to give public comments in person, but if there is anyone who would like to make a public comment at this time, please feel free. Okay, moving to new business. First item of new business is the discussion of the education program plan for the new building project. Dr. Brandt.
Sure, and if I could have my new colleagues come forward, that'd be great. Just so school committee members are aware, we have a couple of the other members of the team who are joining remotely via a teleconference tonight, too, just in case there are other questions. Lee Dorr, principal at Dorr and Whittier, and Ronnie Phillip, who's also here as part of the design team.
Sorry, you have exceeded the maximum number of concurrent calls.
You want to drop off?
Have Lee drop?
No,
Have Lee. Okay. All right, thanks, Lee. Okay, thank you, Ken. There are two items in the packet, but before I do so, the folks at the table are equally responsible for a collective effort on the massive document that's before you and before the community. I know you've met some of them, but not necessarily all. But we have Jason Boone, starting on my left, who has worked very closely with us from Dore & Whittier as part of the design team. Julie, you met Julie Leduc before, the town and district's owner's project manager for the Wildwood project. And I don't think you've met Vivian Verbedian. She is here not only as a Wilmington resident, that's important in and of itself, but also as the vice chair of the school building committee. So they have been instrumental, as you might imagine. We meet, they're part of our leadership team that meets weekly, along with Paul, Lee Dorr, and folks from the town as we move this project forward. So I'll take a pass at this, and I know folks will add into this, but things are moving along with this project. That's certainly the case. We have a slide. I don't know, I'm sort of jumping out of order, but could you bring up that slide for just a moment? Thanks, Tracy. So this is a graphic, and Julie, please jump in here if you want, but that sort of shows where we're at and moving along this continuum of Module 3 feasibility study. And the work here tonight that we'll talk about and be presented to you is going to directly feed into that submission to the MSBA. So we've got a long way to go in this project, clearly, but we are making great progress, and we are on course. And tonight we're going to talk about the one piece, an important piece of the education program plan. Julie, anything else to add just in terms of Module 3 and where we're going with this? Or
So we are currently in Module 3. The first step in Module 3 is the PDP submission, which is a preliminary design program, which is what we've been working on. And there's various bits and pieces. If you've been following any of the school building committee meetings, you've seen Dore & Whittier present different options of the pre-K, pre-K3, and pre-K5 enrollment options on different sites within town, whether it's Wildwood, Woburn Street, or North Intermediate, as well as the town hall site that we are entertaining. So that submission should be completed and submitted to the MSBA by April 18th. And it's a very large document that goes to the MSBA. It includes all of the meeting minutes that we've put together. It is all of the work that Dore & Whittier's done, the existing condition surveys. I'm kind of jumping out of order, but regardless, it's a very large submission, which will then be presented to you all to approve before it is submitted to the MSBA. So right after that, we don't miss a beat. We go right into the preferred schematic report, which we all refer to as the PSR. And that, what it does is we went from 18, and then at the PDP submission, we're going to go down to, I'm just going to call it around number 5, 6, 7 options, to the PSR, which we get it to 1. It's the preferred option of the town. And I know that it seems a little scary that by August, we're going to know exactly what our option is going to be. And from there, that's when we really start the design work. When I say we, I really mean Dore & Whittier. But that's when they take over and they start designing and really working with the schools and the administration about what it is that you're looking for. We're taking this ed plan that you're talking about tonight and bringing it to life in a way that you'll be unbelievably surprised. So there are, throughout the rest of the year, several other submissions that we need to do with the MSBA before we go to town meeting in May of 2025. So that's really just a little over a year away. And it's gonna go by really fast. So we just wanna make sure that everyone's aware that the project website is available. There's an email address that you can ask questions. Like Dr. Brand said, we're going on our 3rd community forum, which we decided to do hybrid this time because we wanted to get the most amount of participation possible. So please tell your friends. And other than that, it seems like we've been working on this for a really long time, but next May is going to come up really fast.
So to come back to the education program plan and the document that is in that we're here tonight to talk about, this is an important piece that again has to be submitted. There's not a presentation that accompanies this. I thought there was just way too much paper and information you had with a 100+ page report, but it is a draft, and we can just talk through that. So in the packet, of course, we have a cover memo there in which tried to provide some context for the school committee. This is a required document for such a project like this with the MSBA. And it really is foundational in terms of this project. Now, we're still at, a 20, 40,000 foot a point in terms of not knowing which option it's going to be, one option, and there's 18 still on the table. So with that, the education program plan is meant to be designed to serve as foundation for any project that emerges. And I know it did to us seem a little bit early for this, but it is what it is, and it's a required document that we have to submit. And so an awful lot of folks have worked really hard along with these folks to put this together. So this is meant to be a comprehensive educational overview of what we have currently in place in our schools, in our elementary schools, keeping in mind there are multiple schools that obviously are a focus of this project, and where it is that we want to go with education in whatever new facility it's going to be. And that has been deliberately tried to highlight in whatever one of the options emerges here. And again, it's foundational. The key elements, though, meant to be at a high level, as you'll see in the document, anyone who takes a look, there's a clear picture of some of the things that we try to capture that's being done currently in our educational programs in our schools, whether it be at the Wildwood or whether it be the Woburn Street or the North. Again, for members watching, those are the three schools that this project is connected to. But there are some key high elements that we tried to outline in the memo that we can get into certainly with questions. Specifically, you noted here, baked into this plan is an intention around forging ahead with the integration of a STEM program at the elementary level. Arguably something that we don't have right now in terms of a dedicated space. There is an aspect of special education in some of our, one particular program that we can talk more about, we tried to do in the document, recognizing that whatever comes out of this will be a new, modernized, but also fully accessible facility that we think makes all kinds of sense to reconsider an alignment, or realignment rather, of a special education program. We get into the sort of the weeds, some might say, in terms of the cycle and the specials that might be offered in the program. But we also capture in this learning spaces. And of course, this isn't a building that we're building, but the building, and Jason can certainly, and we'll talk about this, has to try and conform to and support what it is that we're planning from an educational standpoint. The document itself, as you'll see, it is extensive. It really follows, and we took the lead with Jason and his team around, this is a document, the kind of document and the contents that MSBA is looking for. So sort of a model document out there that we try to include and shape this around. There is a lot of information, of course, if you've had a chance to go through it. I just want to take this opportunity to also extend a thanks to many contributors to this. It was certainly many hands on deck, and that's outlined on page 8 of the document, the PDF. Again, a shout out to Christine Elliott, who really took the lead to help shape this, but a whole lot of folks, all of the central office leadership team, all of our school principals, contributing writers, if you will, to the document that you see here. So I'll stop there, and I don't know if Jason or Julie or Vivian, you want to give any other context before we sort of get into the nitty gritty and open up for questions.
I'll just add sort of one additional thought, Dr. Brand. We're bringing this educational program document to you now, but it's been in development since we first came on board, right? The visioning has informed this document. We've had lots of supplemental meetings about the space summary and the daily school schedule, and we've created options around all of that information gathering. It's just the process of documenting the district's educational intent that is coming to completion now. So I don't want you to think that we've created options out of sequence with the preparation of this document. This is just the words on the page, so to speak, but it's been in development ever since we came on board.
And they act as a guiding principle for the intended choice and the narrowing of the options in order to make sure and instill that whatever the guiding principles as far as the education needs are met by the building that we are constructing. That they don't operate independently, they're succinct into one. So whatever option is selected at the end of the PSR phase and submitted into the MSBA definitely embodies all of the requirements and all of the educational planning that has gone in.
This is meant to be here as a reminder, as sort of similar to many other documents that we bring before you as a committee, as the governing body, and that is, if we're looking for your approval, the first read, if you will, which we'd ask that you consider this tonight. In disseminating this, there was a lot of great and helpful feedback that we've gathered, and with full intention and thought that there might be more tonight. We want this ultimately to be a document that you as a school committee are going to approve. I should note, and I think I've said this before, that it's not always the case that we've come to learn that other communities who are engaged in a project like this may have their school committee vote to approve the education program plan. But since this has to do with education and the programs and services and staffing and such that are going to ultimately be in an eventual building, it seemed not only appropriate but important that we have, and the community of Wilmington has your stamp of approval, if you will, on the plan that's going to go forward. Most everything else related to this project, as I've come to learn, does fall to the decision-making authority of the school building committee, but this is one that, I don't know if we term it an exception, but something that sort of is outside of that. The school building committee doesn't have to formally approve this. But again, we thought it would be appropriate that you as a school committee would. So with that, unless there's anything else, again, we sort of, we want the continued feedback, your thoughts. There's a lot of information to take in here, but certainly we want to come back at your next meeting in March with the hope that you'll approve it and a document that you're comfortable with and can support.
All right, questions, comments from the committee? Mr. Charter.
So first of all, thank you to those of you here, but Dr. Brand, please pass our thanks to everyone who put their time and effort into this document. It is, in some ways, it's an amazing and stunning sort of document to really get a grasp of where we are today, where we think we can go with this. So I really want to stress how much I appreciate the effort that went into this. One of the things that I think would be important at the next community forum, and probably the one after that, and probably even again later, is the 7 bullet points you highlight here. A lot of adults in our community can envision a school that is a cinder block building with a hallway and a bunch of rooms, and that's what a school is. And they haven't done the visits to other new schools to see what education looks like in the 21st century. Those sorts of points, and a few more around them, could really be, and maybe it's a 10-point list as opposed to just these 7, what is different? We're not just replacing a building, we're doing something that is substantially different for education for the children for the next 50 plus years. And so I think those points are really important, and they also give context to some of the other bigger questions people will ask about the project. So if we can keep those in mind and bring them up in whatever form you guys feel is best in those meetings, I think that'd be very helpful. One really detailed, well, fairly detailed question really, on English language learning. There was a lot of conversations when we were having the space meetings a while back about the importance for our special education students of having them as integrated spatially as we could with their peers. For very good and logical reasons, ELL is talked about as being somewhat isolated intentionally to provide a quieter, separate space where it may not be quite so public that a student is in ELL. But does that conflict with the special education guidelines, the special education goals of integration to say those rooms we don't want to be integrated, these ones we do? I was a little bit curious, A, are we gonna run afoul of the intent, the spirit, or even MSBA guidelines with that language talking about moving them outside of the space?
It's a terrific question, and the design team will certainly take any feedback about the geography of where individual pieces and parts are, and we still have lots of time to adjust that to where those pieces are landing doesn't feel comfortable to folks for whatever reason. In my experience, a program like ELL is different administratively and operationally from, self-contained special education programs, for example. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be as inclusive with them as we can be. Sometimes the geography of certain building concepts make it more inclusive or not. In our current concepts, my memory is that the ELL space, which is a half-size classroom, not a full-size classroom, is right on the edge of where the regular classrooms are. And so with careful location of a door, for example, it could be experienced as part of the classroom cluster or not. And there's still lots of time to think through that. But fundamentally, right, ELL is different than self-contained special education, but we still have lots of time to adjust the geography of things if there's a level of discomfort with where that particular program is located.
It also isn't out of the norm to have the ELL be visually part of the classroom, but yet still have the quiet space and separation in order to do the instructional teaching. And maybe kind of like a pull-out, pull-in method where you pull the students out as needed and then integrate them back into the larger classroom. And I think the layout this way, by having just a segmented space within the classroom or adjacent to the classroom, allows for that flexibility for use, not only for ELL, for other learning disabilities or one-on-one sessions, or even just group study.
Ms. Burns?
So I think this is an exemplary document for so many aspects, not only for the building of our new education institution, but also with regards to how we look at our meetings in the future with our FinCom committee, our town of selectmen, the town meetings. I think these data points with regards to what an educational system has evolved to, because we all, well, some of us grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and education was so different. And and I don't think, well, not that I was really in tune to my own education other than getting my homework done, that I never heard discussed those type of discussions. All I heard back from my small hometown was, which elementary school are we closing because of enrollment? But I do want to point out, because I don't want to get too much into the weeds, and I think Dr. Brand shared the board's questions and concerns. I do think there's a myriad of things that we do need to consider, having gone through the building of this high school, and I now, I think, coming to fruition, my understanding is part of the reason why the high school got built for a variety of the, academic and accreditation discussions was that the town could envision what the plan was. The envision right off the bat before, in the process of designing and what it needs to include within its walls and what we wanted to provide for our students was that we have a site to consider. It wasn't the only site, mind you, but it was the only viable site in the sense that this is how possibly it could transpire, with building it to the side of the actual building so that there would be a smooth transition and the move in during February vacation at the end result. And I think that was helpful for, to getting to board stakeholders, I should say, those who don't even have children within our district, envisioning like this could be a viable. Now I understand. Now I understand where we have to remediate within the other community because of wetlands. That's kind of one of my pressing concerns in deciding whether a pre-K to 3 or a pre-K to 5 is going to work out, because it's all going to be site location, and then it's going to be traffic patterns and impact to the community. Because any new building, regardless if it's residential, business, or educational, they'll have some pros and cons, and that's something that is, considering the infrastructure of roads, is a huge aspect in that consideration. Once I would not say to entertain that before you start narrowing down the different options. But the other aspect is, though, too, which I know pointed out in this educational plan, is that when the nursing staff within a pre-K through 5th grade, I certainly am not in agreement for if the numbers are around 752 students, not including the staff, that you only have 2 nurses. Knowing that they take on so many more roles, and the aspect of documenting, caring while, perhaps parent pickups need to be, I think it's ideal, and I think it's spot on that it does need to be centralized in the building, but I think I know you had a little schematic of a proposed design. I think it's got to be centered to the grades, to be centralized, located, to have emergency pickup if needed, close to the CAF, close to the gym. I think it really, and I do think it really warrants no less than 3 nurses, knowing that they take on an educational role within our schools and all the other myriads of administering medication, having somebody available for emergencies, those unexpected, unanticipated, but also being able to meet our contractual obligations with giving them a lunch break too. I can't envision 2 staff members, nursing staff members, for such a a large makeup of school. But, I mean, I don't want to go on because I could talk all night if you know me. But I think that some of the points and some of the concerns, I hope, are brought into the conversation at the right points that you think would be viable and lend itself to the evolution of wherever the subcommittee finds itself. Because I think there are elements that I know impacted us in 2015 or 2014 when we started building this building. You know, there's so many aspects, which I know you'll cover, you know, because we had Doran Whittier for the construction of this building, so I fully anticipate that that'll come into discussion. I just would like, and I don't have the ability to attend all the subcommittee meetings, so I just think, I appreciate you reviewing and touching base, and just, I'll be following along at some points over the next couple of years, but I would love, I think I just would love to hear these aspects as you develop the plan, incorporated in some capacity, so I know it's been heard, it's been figured out, and we're moving on, because I think it will save us so much money. It's a lot of money to ask the town of, to cover their portion, and I worry about the back end expense that we can't anticipate at this juncture, and if we can minimize that, and the headaches and transportation is something that we'll have a sidebar on, I think it'll be a smooth transition, and it'll allow us to start the next process, whenever that timeline meets. But thank you, I've taken too much of your time already. But
If I can just quickly respond, though, I think there's a couple of important points in there, and I think that we should stress, this is preliminary, and it is, as I've, you know, come to learn in conversation with Jason, it is, I mean, it's a lot of intent on paper, but it is still in the preliminary phase, and that over the course of the next number of months, as we drive towards that preferred schematic design or preferred option, will be the inevitable, I'm sure, right, of adjustments and tightening up. I think the staffing, you pointed it to one particular category, but just to take the opportunity, I think that the staffing, I come to learn clearly that our team folks here need to know what we're intending, because they need to build appropriate space. We had to make some sound guesstimates or projections around staffing, for example, right now, and that is incredibly hard. Just as I would, and I've said to some on our team, just like we can't with assuredness predict exactly how many staff in building X we're gonna need 2 years from now of an operating building we have. But so I think that for anyone watching and kind of tuning into this, these are some guesses right now, some projections based upon information we have, but it's still preliminary. And over the course of the next number of months, things inevitably will maybe shift a little bit here or there. So
I just point out that within this document that you do have data numbers.
We do.
So, and
we
I
do.
think take it in conjunction, and those can change and slide as this moves along, and because I couldn't agree with you more, but I think take into consider what data points are gonna be encompassed with regards to the content. I think that's where I, as others may as well,
right.
Base those, I guess, concerns that,
Sure.
or I don't want to say concerns, so those points of attention points, I guess, for lack of a better term.
If I may, I think that's a great insight and a great point to raise about the nursing, and I'm sure as the project evolves, it will come more into fruition. It also has to account for the operating expenses that not necessarily at this phase of the submission, but in the next phase of the submission, you will have to also, as a committee, as Dr. Brand starts being more formalized with the education plan, has to put together a operating expense that conjuncts with the educational plan. And that usually happens within the PSR phase. So as you start evolving, you start noticing what the operational expenses will be as well. And if making a third nursing addition or additional staff members is the right approach, and understanding what the town's kind of additional costs are for that change.
Thank you.
With it, though, I do also want to stress to you, because I heard your comment about, you know, understanding where the site location is, and as well as traffic concerns and all others. It is during the next phase, as we narrow down the options, that all of those will be taken into more of an in-depth observation and look into it. Because the traffic concerns is definitely one that is not only yours, mine as a resident, but everyone has expressed. And now, at the preliminary stage, we noticed that a K through 5 is feasible on some of the locations, not all. But if that is the preferred option or the grade configuration, then our, site configuration and site selection narrows down, and all of them have a good, varied, long, drop-off circulation around the school to offset the traffic.
So, which is a concern.
I'd like to move on to, but we can come back to that. Dr. McCarthy, you've been waiting for a while.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Couple questions, actually more direct, I think, towards Dr. Brand on this. But before I get into that, just want to say thank you for all the work that you've done on this. The document was very comprehensive, been following all the meetings. All the plans are really innovative. I never would have thought to design a school that way with kind of that center in the middle and then the 2 wings on the side. So thank you for all your efforts. Yeah, so just the questions, just to move things along. So comment and question, the document was really large, but I thought it captured really well, like everything going on with K through 5 education here in Wilmington, like really kind of, even though it was over 100 pages, but as succinct as it could. And I was just wondering if this is something in the future that could be repurposed as kind of like a reference guide for parents, guardians, and everyone for all the elementary schools, middle and high school or something like that, because I felt it provided a really great snapshot of here we are, here's how we're set up, and then here's where we're going.
Yeah, I saw that feedback, and I think it can lend itself to that. It's not really unless we have to do something like this that we take the time to document and detail some of the work that happens, organically and planfully way in all of our schools. So I think that there is something that can come out of this once we get through it that could be a helpful resource. Maybe not the breadth and depth that it goes, but certainly something that's accessible for community members to have a better sense of what, in this case, elementary education looks like in our town.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, exactly. Next question was around the STEM special. So I really love the idea of having the STEM special in there. I think that's great that we're including it. Did see though that now all the children are going to be on a 6-day cycle with their specials instead of like a 5-day cycle. Don't know if it's feasible, but I was just wondering if there's going to be significant overlap with science and STEM, if there could be an opportunity to merge the two, and then you can get back to that 5-day cycle. Don't know if that's feasible. I mean, I know there's a lot of things that are probably different in both of them too.
I think it obviously early in the stages, but I think there's a couple of things to note about that, and one of the areas of design deliberacy is to have a space that is not just a space where myself, say as a 4th grade teacher, if it's a pre-K to 5 school or 2nd grade, might take my class occasionally, but we really believe and we know that it's happening in a lot of other districts that have the space where there is dedicated access, regular access to STEM-related education that is in addition to or outside of the other core program. And we think that that's important. We know that, lots of other programs are out there. So I'm sure there will be overlap. We're cognizant of the fact that it adds an additional day at the cycle, as you referenced. But we think that on balance, this is a great opportunity to build space and for some that have gone on tours, when you see these other dedicated, even at the elementary level, dedicated STEM spaces, it may not be as sophisticated as what you'd find in a modern, just built high school, but boy, is it very different than a regular science or regular 3rd grade classroom. So we're excited about the possibility, and we'll have to adjust the schedule, and I think we can do so meaningfully.
Yeah, great. And then just one more question. So back to kind of transportation and busing. So with the document, it looked like kindergarten will have an expanded day, the same as the rest of the elementary school students. And it seems like they'll be riding on the same bus as the 5th graders as well too. Now I understand that's not current practice in town just due to physical separation of the schools. So I was just wondering if there's any concerns or risks with this approach, and if there are, what can be done to mitigate those risks?
Well, so that's also a great question. I think I would draw attention to a couple of things with that. First off, that sort of would be the big picture plan right now. So this is an element that falls outside of space design itself in the interior of the building, but clearly our design team has to know approximately how many buses are you going to have and how many car riders are you going to have, and that's, as I've come to realize and observe, is an important part of the planning. I would suggest to the committee, I would suggest to the community not to get too far down the line in terms of sort of assumptions around that we may transport all students together. I mean, that's the big picture intention right now, but as you all know, we don't do that currently in any of our schools. What we do know is we have to transport our students to whatever facility it's going to be, or whatever design it's going to be, whether there's multiple phases. We still have to work through some of those things, but right now, the early phase and stage, we think that that's an approach that we know that other districts take. We know that it's in existence, and it's something that we feel like it's a starting point, but over the course of what will be 4 years, right? Roughly speaking, still until the doors would open on this facility. I think for that particular service, transportation that is, as long as we know that the space will be there and the laneways will be there and such to accommodate the physical buses, we can work with the design of a system that can then fit into that, if that makes sense. So
Okay.
I wouldn't want to get, folks too anxious about that just yet.
Sure.
I think that
So
can change.
if I could just kind of hear what you're saying, it's kind of a little early. This is just initial plans.
Yeah.
But in due time, then we'll actually sit down and more thoroughly think this out. Okay. Thank you.
So, I did speak to our transportation director on this, and it's not uncommon for districts to transport kindergarten through grade 5 in some communities even closer to us. And, if that's where we end up, there's a savings potentially for busing. But there's also some work that will need to be done from seating order of bus and different things. So we're not there yet, but obviously if we're going to go that direction, there'll be some other work that we do as far as safety of buses. So.
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mr. Smana.
As exciting as this is, when I'm reading it and I'm thinking about it and I'm thinking about, what you're saying in this future, and this is a great document, it's also bringing up the fact that we're doing this for one side of town. And I guess my question is, how much can we be considering? Because in my mind, the thing that makes the most sense is whatever we do on the north side of town should be replicated on the west side of town. And so how much is sort of the logistics of doing something on the west side factoring in what we can do, what we are doing for planning for the north side? And can those elements impact our decisions now so that, because my fear is we have this fantastic school on the north side, and then the west side is still stuck with the Boutwell and and I just see these huge inequities. So I don't know. So I guess my question is, how much can we be considering that in this process? And I don't know if you know the answer to that question.
Well, is something we think about a lot. I do. I think let's just go to STEM education as a great example of one that if this were to be, well, whatever size building, and if it's pre-K to 5 or pre-K to 3, and we're opening doors with a dedicated STEM space, it certainly would seem to me that we, and I say myself as a superintendent and as a school committee, we need to provide nothing less for our students on the other side of town. That falls into the whole conversation we've had around, and the expectation that's, I think, growing from members of the community that is, and I think strongly should be on a parallel track, and that is, as this starts to take shape over the next number of months, what is the plan going to be for the other side of town? And even if that's something that's further down the road, then in the coming years, just to stick with the STEM example, I think it then becomes the administration's responsibility and school committees to plan for how is that delivered? Is that, I'm just throwing, is that an additional space of some sort, a modular classroom? So what's necessary to be able to provide a similar level of service and program access? That's just one simple example, but it comes to the forefront for sure. And we're going to have to think, in my mind, we're going to be landing sort of what this design is going to look like, and then our folks are going to be off to the races and putting a shovel on the ground and starting to build it. I think what has to follow from that is what are we going to do to plan for the other side of town when that building opens.
So one thing about the space planning process that a couple of us sat on, Jay, was there were active conversations about exactly the point he just mentioned, but also with regard to special education, it was a district-wide discussion and what makes the most sense to put in this building and what would be the most sense that should stay in the current 3 buildings on the west side and what would make sense in something there as well. And so I was really impressed with the number of times the conversation was, okay, it was a district-wide conversation about elementary education. Certainly, there was a focus on this particular one and it led to this particular document. I would hope if we go to the point of a replacement of a West Side school in the same sort of a process, regardless of MSBA or not, that this educational narrative would be updated for the West Side and would show any places where there was differences to make sure we weren't having those differences. And it could be, save a lot of time and effort because it's been done relatively recently, it would need to be updated. But I've seen that, and I certainly hope and believe it'll continue. And I was actually very happy with how much of that conversation did happen.
I think there's a little bit of tension here because it's like the better this new school project is, the more the remaining schools suffer by comparison. And no one wants to create a large gap between what obviously one set of students in our town is receiving versus another set of students. But I think that we have to, we also don't want to limit we have to have the long view. So ultimately we need to address both sides of town. We need to address elementary education and not just one set of schools. And we want that to be as strong a program as we can make it and as good a facility as we can ultimately provide all of our students, especially because we want these facilities to last for a long, long time. If this is going to be the next 30, 40, 50 years of education in Wilmington, maybe not 50, but this is going to be decades ultimately of education. We want to get it as right as we can at the first part, and there's inevitably going to be, you can't do everything at once. It just things can only work in parallel so much. They have to go in sequence. But I think that we have to think about where we're going to end up in the end with the best possible buildings and facilities for all of our students. And there's no way around that we're going to have some updated facilities for some students that are not replicated immediately on the others. Ms. Burns.
I have a follow-up question. You've spoken about sites and the different options on certain sites and how some would fit in some and how some wouldn't fit in others. So I guess one of my questions were that depending upon the location of these sites, would that kind of be kind of a deciding factor if we, if ideally I think a pre-K through 5 would be a great option, but depending upon where those locations reside within the community, because we're a bit of an odd-shaped community, that wouldn't be, and I think it would actually impact any future building projects for the west side of school, especially if a pre-K through 5 is a town hall, for instance. It's a little bit of the centralized area, and it could be a plus, could be a negative, who knows, but I think my concern was with putting a school on the north side, would that limit us possibly, I should say, because everything's a prelim, possibly limit what we would go through. Do you know what I mean? Let's say there really isn't, to put a school on the north side, I suppose, I consider town hall the middle of the town. Do you know what I mean? So it's not really a north side school. So I'm thinking more north side, which is the area I live in, and knowing that limitations are tight. Would that be, I'm not looking for a black and white answer, I guess, but could that potentially limit us to the decision of what we go with?
So what might be helpful is to describe sort of exactly where we are in the process right now. Right, when Dr. Brandon says we have 18 options on the table, we are essentially testing the feasibility of what you're describing.
Okay.
Can the building itself go on the piece of property? Can it have the appropriate number of parking spaces and queue length and playgrounds and playfields? And then can it be done in such a way that we don't overlap the existing building, or that it can be done while an existing building is occupied? And so we've done all of that truth testing, and that's what we're going to share with the school building committee, I believe next week, and then with the, at the public forum, coming up. Some sites work better than others, and then the school building committee right now is in the process of evaluating all of those different scenarios against a set of criteria that they've defined. Some of which include where is it geographically in town. And so what we're expecting is when we get down to the short list, that all of those factors will have been taken into consideration, and we're gonna pick only the best ones in everybody's opinion to move on to the next step.
Okay.
So all of those things that you're describing, the traffic, the geographic location, whether or not it's feasible, whether or not it has site, all of those are part of those evaluation
I see.
criteria and being
Thank
taken
you.
into account.
I appreciate you clarifying that. Thank you for that insight.
And I think that, just to add on to Jason really quickly, the matrix that we put together with that criteria actually does have a scoring associated with it.
Oh, neat. Okay.
So it's not just arbitrary, so there is, formulas associated with it and weights, so that once we get down to it and we look at it and we say, well, this is a viable option. Now, there are 3 options that we have to move forward. We have to do a base renovation only, which means one of the buildings, either it's the Wildwood, Woburn Street, or North Intermediate, you have to move forward just a base renovation, which means you bring the building up to code. So making sure that it's ADA accessible, and sprinklered, all of that. So that is one option that has to be in play for the MSBA. We also need an option of an addition renovation. So that is one, and then a new school option. Not to say we're only going to shortlist 3 options, but we have to show those. We don't have a choice.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just as a reminder, we're going to get a more detailed update on the project at the next meeting on the 27th. Other questions or comments? I wanted to add that I was really pleased, looking through the document, to see that teacher planning was its own section, that it wasn't just thought of as like a byproduct. Oh, if we do this over here, then it's also going to have this nice salutary effect where we can sort of put here and have common plan time. That was a deliberate and sort of independent thinking about like what can we do in terms of teacher planning, because that of course is it's kind of one of the casualties of our 8-school system and other aspects of our schedule, and having so many different start and end times. And so having that as a consolidated section where we're really trying to think holistically about like how do we make sure that teachers are able to have common planning time, and that there can be sort of both vertical and horizontal meetings on grade spans, and within subject matters, so that it's not just that the 3rd grade teachers maybe get together to talk a little bit about this, but it's also the science teachers in grades 3, 4, and 5 who can talk about the progression as we go. So I was really pleased to see that that's being thought of as its own independent aspect of the educational program, because I really think that it's so important, and an area in which unfortunately we just have not been able to excel because of the structure of our schools and buildings. Do we have other comments or questions?
Well, if there's none, thank you for those that you have provided. We will, as a team, the leadership team, and with our designer, work to review those that you've provided us, trying to integrate those, and the thought would be that we would provide a red line or track changes version of the document for you at your next meeting at the end of March, and again for your hopeful approval. And then shortly thereafter, that document will go into the package that will be submitted in first part of April, mid-April,
Yeah,
right?
April 18th.
So thank you.
I also want to echo just finally one last thing that Dr. McCaldy said, which was that this document really does give a view of elementary education that is just sort of present nowhere else. There's just no other summary of everything that we're doing from grades, from pre-K through grade 5 like this. And, as you say, like, you wouldn't do it if you didn't have to. It's a lot of work. You're not going to just say, like, let's just write a 111-page document describing our elementary programs and how we might change them in a new building. But I really think that, one of the nice outcomes is that we do have this document, which is just, again, all in one place. You've never seen the entire educational program that we provide from, kindergarten through grade 5, written down so clearly and in such a well-organized way. So I do think that this has benefit even beyond its intended narrow purpose.
And if I just may reiterate the fact that the document is all-encompassing and will be submitted as part of the PDP, but also the MSBA does read through it very carefully and analyzes it, and as part of the PDP review process does ask questions related to it and how have you thought things through to the superintendent and to the committee. So there's another set of eyes also that is masters at this, looking through it, trying to understand and trying to get a clear picture of how education is going to be delivered, and thoughtfully asking questions and raising comments as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Have a great day, questions. Thank you.
Our next item is the first read of the Student Opportunity Act plan.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Mr. Ragsdale. Ms. Elliott is here joining with us via teleconference. And Christine, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Okay. In your packet, just very quickly before I turn it over to Christine, there are 2 items related to the Student Opportunity Act. It is for a first read for you this evening, but just to draw your attention to both the slide presentation, which we'll go through here in just a moment, and the supporting document. Christine, I can drive if you want to steer.
That would be great. Thank you so much, and thank you for allowing me to present through the phones this evening. So as Dr. Brand mentioned, I will go through the slides this evening, given that I can't see the room. If it's okay with the chair, I'd like to go through the slides and then open it up for questions following the presentation. And also in your packet this evening is the full plan, and I do want to thank those of you who sent edits and updates and suggestions and questions. That's been very helpful. My eyes were quite tired after the 111 plus this document as well pages, so I appreciate the eyes with the editing, and I made some corrections. So as Dr. Brand mentioned, at our next meeting, I'll bring the full plan back with those revisions as well. But for the presentation this evening, Dr. Brand, if you could advance to the second slide, please.
We're there.
Great, thank you. So I wanted to provide a little bit of history for the committee about the Student Opportunity Act. In 2019, that was this Student Opportunity Act was enacted, and it was focused on serving students with the greatest needs. Federal funding was distributed to districts based on demographics, and Wilmington, back in 2019, as is now, is considered a minimum aid district. We received Chapter 70 funding. The increase in 2019 was $30 per student through that federal funding source, and it remains the same $30 per student currently. So we have not seen any fluctuation in that funding amount. Each district, though, regardless of the funding allocation, must set clear targets for improving disparities in achievement among student groups and develop a 3-year plan to implement evidence-based strategies to meet their targets. You might recall, those of you who were on the committee, Brian Regan presented the strategic plan in the SOA, Student Opportunity Act, in 2019, right before the COVID pandemic shutdown. And so over that time period, there were adjustments to the implementation of that first 3-year cycle. They are now bringing this back online with the intent of these plans being submitted by April 1st, and approval this spring, and implemented from 2024 through 2027. Next slide, please. As part of the requirements of how to go about putting these plans together, districts were given specific guidelines. We were asked to use data to identify academic disparities among student subgroups, include evidence-based programs. DESE provided specific suggestions that align with their goals. Monitor success with outcome metrics and targets, and gather and incorporate stakeholder feedback on the plan, and all plans must be approved by the school committee. I will mention to you that they had very specific guidelines around looking at multiple data sources, and they also did include an opportunity for districts to look at their own data within what they call the heat map, which allowed us to look at and identify specific subgroups of students who are showing the greatest disparity. So it was color-coded, so we could see, it would pop out visually, which subgroups in different areas have the greatest disparity with other students, their peers. Next slide, please. As a part of this plan, we identified, after analyzing our data, we looked at things like MCAS, the WIDA for our English learners, our DIBBLS, which is our early literacy screener, iReady reading at the middle school, IXL math, we use that as our screening tool at the middle school for math, and the MSDA math is our elementary math screener. So we looked at all of these sources of data, as well as, you know, we have our, I've mentioned it in the past in different presentations, we have data dashboards that we use that really help us look at all kinds of data around attendance and social emotional learning data. So we looked at all of those things, and based on all of that information, we identified two different priority areas. The first being the improvement of performance of students with disabilities and low-income status in ELA and mathematics. So we were looking specifically at MCAS, but it's a variety of, as our metric, but it's a variety of different grades and subgroups that we really want to target and focus on. So the full plan describes those specific grade levels and subject areas. And our second priority area is improving language proficiency attainment levels and academic success for our multilingual learners. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we were given there were suggested options of evidence-based strategies that would be, could be used to address the priority areas. In our district, as you know, we have recently also completed a new strategic plan, and I think that level of work that we did last year to really incorporate so much stakeholder input, gather information, and decide on what our goals were really was helpful in determining our priority areas and our evidence-based strategies as well. So some of these things were things that we were already talking about and had started. So it made sense that these things would actually, once we fully implement them, will help to address those priority areas. So literacy programming is our first. Employ a comprehensive approach to early literacy by implementing an evidence-based literacy program in grades K through 5, including high-quality PD. We actually started that today. The materials arrived last week for the teachers for our new program, and the teachers received their initial launch training this afternoon during the early release CIT day, so that's actually already underway. Multi-tiered systems of support is the next evidence-based strategy that we are focusing on, using the MTSS process to implement academic supports and interventions that provide all students, particularly those with disabilities and multilingual learners, equitable access to deeper learning. High leverage practices is the third, so we want to ensure that we are training staff and that we implement these practices for students with disabilities through professional development and the implementation of a pilot co-teaching model. And the final is to really look at our programming for our multilingual learners, refine and implement effective programming for these students using evidence-based programs that support and sustain their native languages while also addressing their educational needs and language development. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, some of these things have already sort of been started or have been planned for through our budgeting process for next year. So as I mentioned it earlier in this presentation, we're not getting any additional funding than we did last year to accomplish any of these goals. Through the Student Opportunity Act, we don't receive anything more than we did last year. So I wanted to spell out some of the new additions and highlight those things. So you can see on this slide, out of these 4 evidence-based practices, the 2 that are technically things that are new that were not budgeted for in the next coming year's budget are high-level practices, looking at the co-teaching pilot. In this, we're not saying we're saying that we would want to implement this by FY27. So we would need time to plan, prepare, and budget for that. The $70,000 is a rough estimate about the cost to hire a new teacher to help implement a co-teaching model. And then the programming for multilingual learners, you can see here we were tasked to spell out the overall cost over a 3-year cycle of this grant duration. So you can see with this that we did not increase the budget for our FY25 in addition to adding new staff for our English ESL department, but we're proposing that we will likely need an additional staff member that would begin in FY26. So therefore, we're looking at $70,000 a year increase starting in FY26 and continuing on in FY27. So those are the 2 pieces that are actually not currently budgeted, but in some way, whether it's through grant funding or our local budget, the remainder of these items listed under the funding source you can see have been budgeted for or are ongoing things that we are continuing to fund. And the next slide. So our next steps, upon school committee approval, the plan will be submitted to the Department of Education by April 1st for their approval. And once approved, we will begin implementing the action steps in the fall of 2024 for each of the different evidence-based strategy areas as outlined. And annually, districts must provide progress updates based on the metrics identified in the plan. So in our plan, we had to specify specifically what assessments we would be using to determine the effectiveness of our goals. So for example, throughout the plan, you'll see different metrics being used, such as MCAS performance scores, MCAS growth scores, our DIBELS 8 literacy scores, and our access scores. So just as an example, but we will have that information each year, and we will report that back to, I will report that back to you as a committee as we measure the progress as we go each year. And with that, I am happy to take any questions that the committee might have.
Questions or comments? Mr. Smaha.
Yeah, thank you for this. I have a question just about the budget. So as I look at this, the only unbudgeted sort of new expense would be approximately, I know this is approximately because it's 70,000 in FY26, and then like 140 in FY27 for the 70 from the high leverage practices, plus 70 from the multilingual learners. Is that correct? Like that? All right.
So you're cutting out a little bit, but let me see if I can clarify.
Okay.
So most likely it would be FY27 that we would implement the co-teaching model. So that would be a $70,000 expense in that FY27 year. If we are able to fund it sooner, or if we are, able to, with the existing staffing we have, make that work in some circumstance, then we might do it sooner. But the anticipated goal for the co-taught classroom would be FY27's budget, so that would be $70,000 that year. In FY26, we would be looking at implementing a $70,000 expense for the addition of, most likely, after doing some analysis, the addition of an English ESL teacher. So FY26 might be $70,000 increase. FY27 would likely be that cost for FY26 would carry over, right? So that would be that 70,000, and then an additional 140, 70 for the co-taught classroom, and then 70 for the next year of the English learner teacher. Did that help
Yes.
clarify
Yep.
or make it more confusing?
Nope, that clarifies. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
How many responses did we get from the community survey?
I would say into the 30s, roughly around, I think, in the mid-30s.
Okay, that's more than I would have actually expected.
It was staff and community, and the survey didn't ask to discern who was who, so I'm not sure exactly how many were community members, but we did deliberately send it, I mentioned it in the plan, but we sent specific, to specific groups, such as CPAC, and so we addressed it specifically to different, the leaders of specific groups, hoping that they would encourage participation of some of our community partners to respond. So I do think that likely helped, sort of more of a personal invitation to respond as opposed to just an email blast.
Well, thank you very much for putting this together for minimum aid districts like Wilmington. Honestly, the SOA plan is really just a bunch of hoops that we have to jump through, which is kind of, comes through by the idea that a lot of the stuff that we're put in this plan is projects and initiatives that we already had, budgeted and had moved forward, because these are the things that we're concerned about anyway. But this is, as I say, one of the hoops we have to jump through, and here we are leaping through it. But thank you.
Thank you, and I do think that we were poised in a good place, having just completed a strategic plan, because it actually feels to me like the areas that we've identified are things that we really want to focus on, so that even though we're not getting additional funding to do this, this isn't, even though it is sort of we must, conform and follow these guidelines, but it does feel like it's reiterating the same goals we're trying to accomplish. So it's another way to put that on paper and ensure that we're measuring progress and growth.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything.
All right.
Thanks, Christine.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. All right, so our next item is the FY24 financial report. Mr. Rajara?
Thank you. In your packet is FY24 financial report as of March 6th. Our FY24 budget is $47,658,045. We've expended and or encumbered through March 6th $46,866,179. So at this point in time, we have a balance of a little less than $792,000. A lot of that will get eaten up as we continue through the rest of the school year, but I'm very confident in this school year in the black.
Ms. Burns?
Jesse Fennelly, but are there any line items or areas that you potentially could foresee to maybe be concerning? I mean, granted, there's always that unexpected bit, and you haven't put me down yet, we're always finishing the black, but I just didn't know if there were any unexpected expenses that you may have, you're keeping a close eye on.
Yeah, I think that there's a few things that we continuously look at. Again, I have no concern about bottom line budget beating that, but it is a simple one, unemployment. That's well over budget, it has been for a couple of years, but we also have in there some false claims that we get hit for, and then we have to challenge them and so forth to go through the process, and at some point we get credit, when we get the credit. That's one area, but And as we go through this again, this is our first year with Munis on a payroll standpoint, so we are living with some growing pains. Clearly, some of the explanations where we have to move encumbrances. We're not concerned with the salary that's been charged or is expected to be charged for payroll. It's, because sometimes we have to move a staff member from this line to that line, and for some reason the encumbrances aren't going with it. So one account might look like it's well over budget because the encumbrance that belongs to another line is moves, trying to figure that out. So there's some growing pains, and we're working through that. But I think from a bottom line standpoint, we'll be fine.
Okay, great, thank you.
Dr. McCarthy?
Yeah, thanks. And my question might be a follow-on from what you were saying about maybe the system, because, well, maybe take a step back. Thank you for being a good steward of the budget and saying we're going to be in the black. That's no small feat, so thank you very much, especially when you hear of other districts around the area that are going to be quite in the red, so thank you. So I noticed when looking through the report that there was a couple common themes I saw that maybe were higher than what was originally allocated, notably like salaries, which I think you just answered. It's an issue with the Muni system, but also like athletics I saw too was a lot higher. So on some of those items where the spending tended to be higher than expected, I was wondering, what do you think drove some of those increases and if they were expected or not? And then lastly, if they are higher, what can we do better in the future to accommodate that?
So I think especially athletics, so we have a revolving account as well, where gate receipts go in from a revenue standpoint, as does some programs. And when we budget, we usually budget for certain categories, some expenses to be charged to the revolving account. So we haven't done that yet, so all the expenses that the majority of them we've incurred right now is sitting in the local budget. So that's why it's over budget from a local budget perspective.
Sure.
But because some of that was budgeted in the revolving account for athletics.
Okay.
Instead of move money. There's some other items here where grants, we might have anticipated some salaries going to grants earlier in the year, but by the time we do submit the grants, it gets approved and so forth, a period of time has elapsed, so it's going to catch up.
Okay.
Then salaries will jump.
All right, thanks. So when we go through the whole fiscal year in June, then we'll have a more clear snapshot of like what came in under and over on the sub budgets.
Right.
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Mr. Turner?
One comment, and it's a flavor of what Mrs. Burns already said, but I do always want to make mention here and when we're talking to the Finance Committee, how fantastic a job this district does, and you and your team, particularly Paul, consistently being under budget is, for any public institution, is a real feat and a real accomplishment, and it is amazing how well this district does as stewards of the town's money. And I will always want to make sure people hear that and hear that and hear that, because it is really an amazing and well done accomplishment. So thank you.
It's not just me,
Yeah,
it's the
the team.
principals and
Yeah.
the staff that know and they try to adhere as best they can to the budget and superintendent. So
Yeah.
I can say no, but I don't know. It's a testament to the time, just
Yes.
because they kind of get it.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Paul.
Any questions or comments? I was going to channel Jesse with his, anything notable to draw our attention to. Question, and
Sorry.
MJ beat me to it. First question right out there.
You have your code plaid shirt on tonight, so.
There are two motions.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so would someone like to make the first motion? Ms. Burns?
I'd like to make the motion to allow the Assistant Superintendent of Administration and Finance to move budgeted funds from the salary adjustment line to the proper line items to account for lane changes and contractual salary increases.
All right, and a second by Mr. Samaha. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor? And that is unanimous. And do I have a volunteer to read the second motion? Mr. Turner?
I would move to allow the Assistant Superintendent of Administration and Finance to distribute the circuit breaker offset to the appropriate special education tuition lines.
and seconded by Ms. Burns. And any further discussion? Hands to say.
Yeah, no.
Your hands there. All in favor? And that is unanimous.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you very much. All right, that brings us to subcommittee reports. Do we have any subcommittee reports tonight? Doesn't look like we do. All right, next, any correspondence?
None this evening.
All right, that brings us to future dates and notable items. We have on March 21st, 22nd, and 23rd, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, the Lamplighters Drama Guild presenting Newsies, the Broadway musical, right down the hall from us here in the Joanette. Yes, people don't necessarily know that, but the school committee, we get specific handwritten invitations from the cast members and crew members of the show, and it's an absolute delight. So be sure to get your tickets to Newsies. You know, you probably should get tickets for all 3 shows just in case. You wouldn't want to, see it once and then like wish to see it again, and it would be sold out. So buy early, buy often. And on the 27th, we have our next regular school committee meeting, 7 p.m. March 28th is the next community forum for the Wildwood MSBA building project. April 3rd is the next meeting of the school building committee. I said April 3rd. April 6th will be Parent Guardian University here at the high school. April 10th will be our after the next regular scheduled meeting. And then school break, April break from April 15th to April 19th. What are we?
So it's.
Oh yeah, we have another school, right,
Yes.
that's right, and also it's on the 20th, right?
March
Yeah, so actually, on the March 20th, Wednesday, March 20th, we have actually the next, school building committee meeting, for the Wildwood School Building Committee. So, watch the Wildwood School Building Committee meeting and then go to Newsies the next night.
Yes.
In celebration. All right, and that brings us to the end of our agenda. If there is nothing else, I would look for a motion to adjourn. Ms. Burns. All right, and second by Dr. Bryson. All in favor? And we are adjourned. Thank you very much. Good night,
you.
everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.